Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet of ours. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation today. And we're going to be talking about renewable energy. It's the keystone of a low carbon economy. The Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law contributed much needed progress, but has not completed the transition. Only approximately 21% of total utility scale electricity generation in the United States comes from renewables. And according to the World Resources Institute, 31 gigawatts of solar energy capacity was installed in the United States in 2023. That's up 55% compared to 2022. But now we're entering the second Trump era, facing an administration that, despite its hostility to renewables overall, oversaw a 12% decrease in emissions during its first administration. Is renewable energy unstoppable? That's the question, and our guest today has some answers. Tim Montague is a trusted advisor in the solar and energy storage industries, and he's host of the Clean Power Hour podcast, also an advocate for clean energy innovation. Tim's dedicated his career to helping businesses, policymakers, and individuals harness the transformative power of solar energy. And as president of Montague Solar Consulting, he's worked with leading developers and engineers to accelerate the deployment of clean energy solutions, as well as to drive impactful change. Tim's Clean Power Hour podcast spotlights the people, technology, and policies that are reshaping the energy industry. He covers topics like distributed versus centralized solar systems, cutting-edge battery storage innovations, and the economic benefits of renewables. Tim plumbs the depths of these complex and rapidly evolving issues, and his ability to break down technical concepts into accessible insights has earned him a loyal audience of industry professionals and sustainability enthusiasts. You can learn more about the podcast at cleanpowerhour.com. Clean Power Hour is all one word, no space, no dash, cleanpowerhour.com. We'll be starting the conversation right after this quick commercial break. Welcome to the show, Tim. How you doing today?
I am great, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. You've been doing this podcast about three and a half years now. What inspired you to start a show about the solar energy and storage industry?
Well, I got into podcasting actually in 2013. I had a little tech show called CU 150 here in Champaign. And then I got into solar full time in 2016, started working for a big solar installer called Continental Energy Solutions in Chicago in the spring of 2017, and I quickly created a show there to educate mostly facility owners initially about the opportunity that solar or rooftop solar presents. It was called Solar Works for Illinois. And so over the years, that show morphed. It became the Solar Podcast because we were expanding out of Illinois. And then I left Continental and I took a segment that I had created called the Clean Power Hour, which was a news roundup with another journalist named John Weaver, who I love. That segment no longer exists. But anyway, they allowed me to take that brand with me. And here we are, fast forward to 2024. So podcasting has been a big part of my life for many years.
How has the audience changed? You mentioned it started out focused mostly on the producers and utilities that might adopt technology. Who's listening now?
So my core audience is clean energy professionals, solar installers, solar developers, solar financiers, project managers, financiers, anyone in clean energy. But really my bullseye is solar installers. I am an expert at large commercial, what we call CNI, commercial industrial solar, and I help solar installers go further faster on that journey from residential and small commercial into large CNI. And so I try to cover all aspects of solar, batteries, and then adjacent technologies. You know, I've geeked out on some thermal technologies and geothermal, because it's important that we energy professionals know more than just our little niche here in the solar industry, but it is a great economic opportunity, of course, and I try to be a beacon for people who are also making the segue into clean tech from maybe fossil fuels. And that's the case, that many people are retooling to come into clean energy because it's such a fast-growing industry.
So how would you describe where we are given the new administration entering the White House now and their resistance to renewable energy. Is it an inevitable transition at this point, or is this something that is under threat as a result of the election?
That's a great question. And here's the good news. The forces of global finance are really driving the energy transition. As much as you and I care about the environment, most business owners, most grid operators really do not have the environment front and center. They're looking at their bottom dollar, their bottom line, their profitability. And solar, wind, and batteries are now the cheapest sources globally of energy. And so when a utility, for example, let's say NIPSCO in Indiana, it's a gas utility. They own a bunch of gas plants, gas power plants. Well, those facilities have a lifespan, right? And they have to be replaced with something. And so when the utility goes, well, let's look at the landscape. Oh, well, according to BNEF, Bloomberg New Energy Finance, solar, wind, and batteries are the cheapest sources. So we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders to do the right thing. And that means issuing RFPs for large scale solar, wind, and batteries. And that's what's happening. And that's happening also at the distributed scale. That's rooftop solar for homes and businesses. And that's why we see this massive influx. It's not just in California or in Colorado, Arizona, where you actually see it in the built environment when you go to those places, but it's here in Illinois, it's in New York, it's in New Jersey, it's across many traditionally blue states. Granted, the red states are a little slower, but even Texas, right?
Yeah.
They have exceeded California now on an annual basis of installations of solar because they like money.
Well, so is the United States, which currently has an industrial policy focused on the transition, potentially going to fall behind as a result of the focus on drilling for fossil fuels?
Yeah, we have also survived a Trump administration. So here we are recording in the early or late fall, early winter of 2024, right? We're about to get Trump Part 2 or Trump Musk. And Musk is a bit of a wild card because he is very pro renewables and he wants to make money. But Trump didn't kill solar in 2016 to 2020.
No, in fact,
when
we made progress. We made progress during his administration.
Yeah, the whole industry grew during that time, and it's because of this tidal force. You can think of when I say global finance, I'm talking about the influx of capital into buying new assets. There is this constant energy out there called money that is looking for a purpose and a way to generate returns. And new energy or clean energy happens to be a great way to do that. And so, yes, we currently have some amazing legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act, which most consumers are ignorant of, but energy professionals love the IRA. It is spawning, for example, the reshoring and onshoring of factories, solar panels, inverters, batteries, EV chargers, and EVs. Manufacturing, these are high-paying jobs, and a lot of these factories are getting built in red states. So guess what? Even though Trump talks about killing the IRA, he is not going to do that because the governors of those states are like, yo, we want those jobs. These are good for our workers, our residents, and our economy.
So given the economic momentum that we're looking at now, what are the major challenges in scaling solar energy solutions in particular? And how do you see the industry overcoming them in the next few years?
I mean, there's a myriad of challenges, Mitch. I won't sugarcoat it, okay? Interconnection queues are very long. When you build a solar facility or a wind facility, you have to interconnect it to the grid, whether that's a DG, distributed generation rooftop facility, or a utility scale facility. At the utility scale, there's a ginormous backlog. There's like 2 terawatts of energy projects that are just sitting there in these queues. And we need to do better at managing our grid. That infrastructure or that system that we designed 100 years ago really worked, right? It brought electricity to rural communities, for example, and it gave us a very reliable grid. It is a regulated monopoly system. And guess what? There's a lot of gravity in that system and it doesn't change easily. And technology has changed And we need to get better at allowing that technology to do its job and modify the grid and clean the grid. But there's also bottlenecks in um, labor, right? We
Uh,
need 1 million new electricians to come into the workforce in the next 20 years. That's a lot of electricians. Right now, they're retiring faster than we're training new ones. And so staffing and training are big issues. And there's an opportunity. I'm on the advisory board of a robotics company that is building a little robot called Lumi that is going to pick up solar panels from a pallet and put them on the rack and allow the workers to install that solar. And this is just a bit of a grind, right? It's a heavy lift, it's very repetitive. So this is good for workers if we can do it efficiently and cost effectively. So things like that there's going to be innovation. The technology is relatively mature. Like solar panels have been around since the 50s. So we've had a 70-year run to mature that technology. And yes, most of it is made overseas, and we're in the process of onshoring solar panel manufacture now, thanks to the IRA, really.
mhm.
And so that is a challenge, right? When the Trump administration and the Biden administration, frankly, has has maintained many of the tariffs that were put in place on these technologies. For example, you think about a solar panel factory. I was just at one in South Carolina a couple weeks ago, and they're doing what's called panel assembly.
Mhm.
But the components of the panels are these, basically 6 by 6 inch squares of silicon with metal strips on it so that they can harvest solar electrons.
Mhm.
Those cells are manufactured in Southeast Asia. They are not made in America. There are very few factories that manufacture those cells. Now, those factories are getting built now, thanks to the IRA, because the IRA gives special incentives to build a factory on American soil. So those parts and pieces, though, are currently made elsewhere. And so while you can put together a panel factory, the stuff going into the panels is going to be more expensive because of the tariffs. And that's an ongoing source of friction, basically holding us back.
Well, you mentioned the tariffs, and the response from China in the last week has been that they're going to restrict the export of critical minerals to the United States in retaliation for what are currently threatened tariffs, in addition to the ones that Biden put in place. Is that a crisis moment for us? And does the United States have an alternative source of those critical minerals?
I mean, it is a wake up call for sure because a lot of rare earth elements, these are used in EV batteries, for example, and EVs in general, and in all kinds of electronics. Our whole economy runs on electronics and microchips now, right? And there's a lot of rare earth elements in this. And a lot of those rare earths are processed in China. They're not necessarily all mined there, but they are processed. And
Mm-hmm.
so China is potentially a bottleneck and they are a force to reckon with. And so I do consider the clean energy transition in particular to be a national security issue, right? If we can clean our grid, for example, and do so economically and become truly energy independent and resource independent. But we need to make those panels in America with American silicon
Mm-hmm.
and solar cells and ingots. And so we have to get serious about making all those parts and pieces. And we have a long way to go. We've been kind of asleep at the wheel, Mitch, frankly, when it comes to industrial policy. The attitude was, well, let's send all those factories overseas because the labor's cheap and it's good for the shareholders, right? And that does work, but it also means that you're then liable or you're exposed to this risk that, well, if China shuts off certain flows, then we could really be hurting.
So I'm curious, the problem that we face right now is an emotional reaction to globalism. And there is, to a degree, a benefit in globalism in that we can try to tackle a global problem together. Are we, as we retreat from globalism, potentially retreating from the opportunity to collaborate with the rest of the world to lower our carbon emissions?
Probably. I am not an isolationist.
Mhm.
I have very strong ties to Northern Europe. My children are half Norwegian. They're both dual citizens. And, it is a global economy, as you and I know. Like
Yeah.
our economy is so integrally tied across the globe now. That is just the nature of that beast. And you can't just flip a switch and say, oh, we're going to stop getting stuff from places like China or
Mhm.
Southeast Asia. Um, Now, I can appreciate also not wanting to spend a lot of resources on a war between Russia and Ukraine. And that is certainly part of Trump's ethos. He wants
Mhm.
to end that war. And I am no expert on how to do that in a equitable fashion, but I'm also fond of the concept of not sending, American bombs to Europe to kill Russians and Ukrainian young men mostly,
Mhm.
and citizens. That's, wanton violence that is holding humanity back from the great transition, right? We need to have basically a spiritual awakening, Mitch, and realize that, well, here we filled the earth with our stuff and our bodies, and this is a new landscape for us that we're really not prepared for psychologically, because for most of our evolution, I'm an ecologist by training, and I think in thousands of years, but our minds are prepared to think for maybe half a year. We're hunter gatherers at our core still, but here we are with a world that's full of our stuff, and we have to think differently about the future if we're going to survive.
So that's a great way to almost end this section of the conversation. But let me ask this: advice would you give to President Trump if you had the opportunity to have his ear for 10 minutes about the pace of the transition and the
Yeah.
benefit?
Yeah, certainly the energy transition, and this includes clean energy sources, cleaning the grid, but also, for example, transportation, right? Weaning ourselves off of fossil fuels and replacing fossil technologies with electric vehicles. Because you can get solar electrons, charge those batteries, and run the EVs, and thereby produce a lot less pollution and be independent. And so I would say to Mr. Trump, look, this is a national security issue. If China makes the energy transition faster and better than us, they're going to have an advantage because the fuel for that economy is the sun. And
Mhm.
photons are free and they are super abundant. We get 10,000 times more photons from the sun than we actually need to power all of society. Literally, we could power society many, many times over with those free photons. And so if you have the technology and you're growing it locally, and we invented the solar PV technology in New Jersey at Bell
Yep.
Labs in 1954, right? But we let others commercialize it and dominate that industry. We need to bring it home and get smart. So that's the main thing, is that yes, the energy transition is a good economic opportunity. We call it a wealth transfer opportunity. So it is good for business, but it's also a national security issue.
Well, let's hope we get smart. And I want to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back to continue the conversation. Now let's return to the conversation with Tim Montague, host of the Clean Power Hour podcast and president of Montague Solar Consulting. Tim, one of your shows that I listened to was about the trade-offs between distributed and centralized solar energy systems. And some of the criticism I've heard of people putting their panels on their homes is that they're not contributing to the growth of a local or solar infrastructure. What are the benefits, the trade-offs that we need to understand between distributed and centralized solar systems?
Great question. It's kind of apples and oranges.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about a clean grid, you want both. You want a fruit salad. So DG, distributed generation, rooftop solar. You have a roof, it has exposure to the sun. If it's south facing, that's wonderful. If it's flat, that's also wonderful. Commercial roofs tend to be flat, so we want
Mm-hmm.
flat roofs, and we want south facing or east west, that works. And you put black panels on them called solar panels. They take photons and convert them to electrons that then get converted into grid power with a device called an inverter. It's very mature, very simple, and it saves consumers and business owners money. That's the bottom line. It also reduces air pollution, which is good for human health and the environment at large. And it also helps us step back from the brink of climate change by reducing carbon emissions. But as we might talk about, there's a catch there. So,
Mm-hmm.
anyway, DG is very important because we've already built on about 6% of the landscape in a place like the United States. There's a lot of rooftops. So we could generate a significant portion, perhaps 40% of our power from rooftop solar. And then we have all these wide open spaces. Some of them are greenfield farm fields, and some of them are brownfields, let's say a contaminated site or a landfill. And you can put solar on that. my closed city landfill in downtown Urbana here in Champaign-Urbana in central Illinois, where I live, now has a community solar farm on it that generates low-cost electricity for low and middle income residents in the vicinity of the facility. And that's good for consumers. It's good for Urbana because they're getting revenue that they were not getting. A landfill is something you can't really do anything else with.
Yeah.
Now, so it's going to be a both and. We need to convert, but get this, we only need to convert about 1% of the landscape to solar panels to actually completely clean our grid. So it's not a big percentage of our land that we're talking about.
So if one's considering solar for their home, is it more efficient to install panels at home to support community solar or to demand that your utility embrace renewable energy?
I guess if you're going to be hardcore about it, producing the energy on site is going to be the most economical and environmentally friendly thing to do. The solar panels pay for themselves, so to speak, in their carbon footprint in about 2 years. So you put them up there and they're replacing grid power, right? Because you're just getting electrons directly from the sun and consuming them locally. But many people don't own their own home or don't want solar or don't have a sunny roof. I'm a good example. I own a small home, but I have a huge maple tree in my backyard that I love because it provides shade. It reduces my cooling load in the summer. It shades my deck. I can sit out there and work in the middle of the day, and it's lovely. And I'm not cutting that tree down for anything. And then, of course, many people live in apartments or rentals, and they just can't put solar. It's not so. That's where community solar comes in, right? You subscribe to a community solar facility, and we have good community solar in about 6 to 10 places now, 6 to 10 states. That list is growing, but you need special legislation to allow for that. And so that's good for consumers because you can then get a discount by buying clean electrons, and it's all done with computers. But they build central arrays, say a 30 or 40 acre solar farm that then gets subscribed to by hundreds of residents or business owners. It's a both and then they get a discount and we clean the grid all at once.
So the other concern everybody has when they talk about solar is the capacity to store that energy for use at night when there is or when there's no wind. How do you see the advancements in battery technology keeping pace or not with the demand for storage capacity?
We truly have all the technology that we need today. So for stationary storage, as we call it, this is a box for residential that's the size of a small refrigerator that you put in your garage or on the outside wall of your home, depending on where you are and the weather and what the jurisdiction wants you to do, the AHJ authority having jurisdiction. And it has lithium iron phosphate batteries inside it for the most part. That chemistry has kind of dominated the stationary storage industry, and this is true at small and large scale. So if you look at a utility scale battery farm, which there are many of now in places like Texas and California, and they're coming to a neighborhood near you, you just don't know it because there is a lot of storage getting built now. The storage is a sponge for the grid operator. It can give energy when you need it, and it can absorb energy, and so it's very useful technology. It's like a multi-dimensional technology. So we have all the technology we need. Now, of course, there's emerging technology and there's lots of R&D going into this and there's lots of novel chemistries being developed. Lithium is problematic because it's highly reactive and so it does catch fire or cause potentially what's called thermal runaway. And that is a scary thing. And batteries do catch fire. But guess what? Gasoline cars catch fire. Houses catch fire. We have electric fires. We have fires of all kinds all the time. And so the reality is that we can do this safely and we are doing it and we will get better. And there will be, sodium is coming on. There's flow batteries that are coming on. There's hydrogen batteries that are coming on. There's all kinds of novel technologies that are also being developed. And I'm a fan of that. We should continue to do R&D, but just understand that we have the technology and with the right incentives, it can be very economical for both the grid operator and the consumer.
Does the configuration of community and business energy distribution change dramatically? Do we need to rethink, for instance, the local utility as a business model in order to support the kind of interconnection, both the privately owned and publicly or corporate owned assets like batteries that might be fed by rooftop solar in homes. How do we rethink the business relationships that currently dominate our energy infrastructure?
Yeah, we really do need to disrupt the utility model that we developed in the United States. It's outdated and it's designed to not change very quickly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of built-in gravity in that system. And
Mhm.
so what some are doing is are defecting from the grid. We have the technology so that you can become independent of the grid with solar or solar and wind and batteries. You have to have a battery, though. You have to have a storage
Yep.
device because those renewable energy sources are intermittent, like
Mhm.
solar, of course, when the sun shines, wind when the wind blows. And so I would prefer that FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that oversees all of the grids across the United States, were
Yep.
to become much more dynamic and say to the various and sundry other grids, these are ISOs, independent system operators. I live in a ISO called Midwest Independent System
Mhm.
Operator, MISO, which covers a huge swath of the Midwest, the Great Plains, down into Texas. And right now, those organizations are huge sources of friction and resistance to change and the adoption of clean energy in a timely manner. And what we need to do is just hop to and start doing things faster. Like we've gotten really slow at building infrastructure, Mitch. And there's some great statistics about this. Like the Empire State Building was built in just a couple of years.
Yeah.
Today, it would take probably 10 or 20 years. And there's no reason for that. And there's no fundamental reason, but the machine has its way, and we need to say, okay, let's reboot and reinvent that machine.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned the interconnection backlog that
Yes.
prevents us from making this transition quickly. How could we change that? Is that simply a matter of changing the regulatory requirements, or is it something more comprehensive?
I think it really does boil down to regulations,
Mhm.
and decision making. Like these ISOs are like God. The world operates on their agenda. And when they say, look, we're going to put a pause on this for 2 years, that happens where they just say,
Mhm.
look, we have so many applications for projects, we're just going to stop all new project development. Well, how is that serving consumers who can save money by buying into a community solar project, right? And who can breathe cleaner air when we clean the grid? That seems like a good thing for the economy. Like, ill health is a huge weight that drags down the economy. It's not good for anyone. It's not good for business owners. It's not good for families. It's not good. Not to mention, it's no fun being sick or dying. So, yes, we just need to say, look, we're going to do this. We're going to do this in a timely manner. We have the technology. It's all about getting it deployed, as Jigar Shah,
Mhm.
who's the head of the Loan Program Office at the DOE, likes to say, deploy, deploy, deploy. But
Mhm.
if we have rules that are bogging that process down, there's no way to make the transition quickly, but there's no reason fundamentally we can't make the transition, say, in 10 years.
Do we also need more examiners, more technicians to do the regulatory review process?
I mean, we absolutely need a safe grid. Okay. I'm a big fan of a very reliable, safe grid. That's very important. You don't want the grid blowing up. And if you do it wrong, it could potentially blow up. But there are phenomena like community scale microgrids that are now on the scene where the utilities, like the utility that operates at the city scale,
Mhm.
they want to make money by installing infrastructure. This is substations, this is transmission and distribution power lines, and those kinds of things. We say to them, look, let's let's build big batteries, big solar farms in the vicinity of the urban setting, and then we don't need to send that power far afield. We can use it and we can microgrid if there was to be a regional outage, a big storm like we had in Texas a few years ago
Yep.
with the storm Uri that shut down big portions of the Texas grid and was nearly a huge catastrophe. I mean, it was a big financial hit in the billions of dollars, but it was nearly a much bigger disaster that could have sent that grid into a black hole for several
Yeah.
weeks. It was a several day outage, could have turned into a several week outage. So we just need more microgrids at a large scale. We have microgrids at the
Okay.
building scale now, and now we just need to do that more at the city scale.
Now, you mentioned earlier that there's more to this than simply generating clean energy, and that's how do we start to draw down the CO2 in the atmosphere? Are there
Right.
emerging technologies or strategies you're excited about in climate restoration? And do you see those carbon removal practices being integrated into the energy infrastructure itself?
Yeah, it's a totally separate world, really. Like the economy, the global economy is about 50 gigatons of CO2e or CO2 equivalent pollution, right? And so when we net zero the economy, we're removing those 50 gigatons, which is a good thing, which means ppms will no longer go up. When
Right.
I was born in 1965, Mitch, global ppms of CO2 in the atmosphere were 320. We're now at 420, and we're headed to 450 by the time we reach net zero, by the time we net zero the economy. And that's a problem because we're already seeing, right, at 420 that we're having increasing floods, fires, droughts.
Yep.
And ultimately, this is going to cause human migration, as you well know, and as you've covered on your show. Human migration is the big scary thing because humans don't react well when thousands of strangers show up unexpectedly on their doorsteps. We tend to get violent and do mean things to one another. And I just don't want to see that. So, anyway, there are some good technologies that are out there that nature's using all the time, coincidentally, like ocean iron fertilization, okay, is just one. There's an author named Peter Fikowski. He wrote a great book called Climate Restoration, which I encourage
Peter's
your
been on
listeners.
the show several times.
Oh, he's been here?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. I love it that you've covered Peter Fikowski's work because it's very important for all of us, whether you're energy professional into the environment and reducing climate change. This is very important for us to have in our awareness that we can augment some natural processes like iron in the ocean. Okay, dust is blowing off the deserts all the time and going into the ocean or out of volcanoes. And when Mount Pinatubo exploded in 1994, I think it was, right, global CO2 levels flattened because of the iron in the dust. And that
Yep.
only impacted like 0.1% of the ocean. And yet it caused a global phenomenon. And so there's good evidence that we can use some technology to augment natural processes, and most of it has to do with the ocean because it's so vast. It's three-dimensional. It covers 70% of the earth, and so we have to suck carbon out of the atmosphere. Bill Gates wants to do this with basically a glorified air conditioner, which is also possible, but it costs 40,000 times more to do that than to put ocean dust in the ocean. I mean, iron dust in the ocean, and which encourages microorganisms to grow and they absorb the CO2. So it's kind of, yes, there's an industrial version of this. And the only challenge with things like ocean iron fertilization is how do we make that part of the economy and a viable economic solution? It's almost like a superhighway, right? Where you need government action to invest in these things because private companies are not going to think that long term or grand scale.
This is really interesting from an industry standpoint, but what can an individual who wants to support clean energy do, despite the fact they're not in the industry? What should they be asking their representatives or their utility to do?
Yeah, I mean, if you live in a state where you have good net metering, great, install solar. If you don't have good net metering, ask your legislators to make sure that you get good net metering because when you install a solar facility on your home, it's going to overgenerate by nature in the summertime and it's going to undergenerate in the winter when the sun is lower in the sky. And you need net metering to take full economic advantage of and realize the economic benefits of solar. They just destroyed net metering in California. It's called NEM 3.0.
Yeah.
And it reduced the solar industry by 70%, the residential solar industry by 70%. Literally, thousands of contractors out of work, fleeing the state, or going into commercial solar, which is fine. But that's the big thing for consumers is be able to use it and make it economical because it's a purchase that is significant. If you buy a solar system, it's like $20,000 to $30,000. It's like buying a car.
Yeah.
It's going to be there for 20 years. It could pay itself off in 5 years if you have good incentives, but it could take 15 years if you don't. And
Mhm.
people are just not going to invest in something that takes 15 years to pay off because they don't know if they're going to be in their home for 15 years. So they just go, oh yeah, that's off the table. So that's a big one. And then I guess think about the energy transition and how, electric vehicles, while there is like a blowback happening in America on EVs today, they are definitely the future. They are
Yeah.
more economical, fewer moving parts. These are vehicles that could go a million miles, not just 150,000 miles for the life of the vehicle. And if you go to Northern Europe, you'll see this, right? They have fully embraced the EV transition, and that's because gasoline is more expensive there. And so they adopt new technologies, including solar earlier. They're 10 years ahead of us, Mitch. And this goes for China too. So these new technologies happen in other places sometimes. We think of ourselves as the king of technology, which we are when it comes to like computers and AI, but there are things that we're not doing as quickly as some other places that we could, and it's because of the rules.
As you said about Bell Labs, they invented everything. I used to visit and they would say, we invented the hard drive there. We invented
The transistor.
the transistor. And you'd be walking down one hall and
Yep,
half of the modern world was invented there, but they never commercialized most of it.
pretty
Is the
crazy.
United States running the risk of being the Bell Labs of the planet?
Exactly. We don't want to be that.
So yeah, I want to encourage folks to listen to the Clean Power Hour. What's an episode they should start with?
Oh my goodness. So many interesting guests. It really depends on what your bailiwick is. If you're interested in solar, check out a show that I did recently, or an interview I did recently with T.R. Ludwig. He's the founder of a company called Brooklyn Solar. They're putting solar on brownstones. These are low-rise
Mhm.
apartments and homes in New York City where, you've got a long, skinny building. You need to put a basically a carport or a shade structure with solar on it. And they innovated this in New York City in a highly dense, very difficult jurisdiction. So that's a good one. Um, if you're interested in solar technology like inverters, you could check out um, one of my many interviews with CPS America. They're a big inverter manufacturer. I recently covered grid scale batteries also. I love
Oh,
battery
cool.
storage. So that's another great episode.
Tim, thanks so much for spending time with us today. Just real quickly, what's your vision for the future of the Clean Power Hour?
Wow, that's something I don't think too much about. I'm just busy producing useful content for consumers and energy professionals. I want to help the United States go further faster into the clean energy transition. So I cover everything solar and batteries. And I would love to get more interesting, visionary guests on the show. I guess that's the main thing that I think about when I think of the future of the show is who are the visionaries out there? Like Peter Fikowski. I think Peter is a visionary to have this awareness and do that, that first principles analysis of where are we going and how are we going to get back to 300?
Well, Tim, keep up the great work. We're going to be listening. And thanks very much for spending time with us today.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much, Mitch.
That was my conversation with Tim Montague, host of the Clean Power Hour podcast and president of Montague Solar Consulting. You can hear the show and check out that Brooklyn Solar episode, which we'll link to in the article that accompanies this podcast at cleanpowerhour.com. All one word, no space, no dash, cleanpowerhour.com. The clean energy transition is underway. The question is whether the United States will be a leader or a laggard. And if a laggard, how will we ultimately be competitive in a world where photons, not fossil fuels, drive the engines of industry and transportation? As Tim noted, U.S. scientists and engineers have invented most of the clean energy technologies in use, but have not consistently turned them into commercial successes. Northern European countries and China are racing ahead with the transition, and China now leads the world in the export of electric vehicles. Economic and political leadership in the world are built on innovation, including the integration of natural climate restoration practices into the electric grid, industrial production, and foreign policy strategies, if we want to emerge from the fossil fuels era as a leader. I urge you to check out Tim's show and take action yourself, whether you have access to locally produced solar power, community solar programs, or the ability to install photovoltaic panels on your home or business, the investment will pay off financially and environmentally. 24 states have community solar regulations, and 42 states have some form of net metering legislation in place, though many receive low ratings from the Interstate Renewable Energy Council's freeingthegrid.org. Use your economic vote to send a message that solar and wind power are your preferred energy sources. Another action you can take is spreading the word about this episode or any of the almost 500 interviews that we have in our archives. Writing a review about sustainability in your ear on your favorite podcast platform will help your neighbors find us. Folks, you're the amplifiers that can spread more ideas to create less waste. Please tell your friends, family, coworkers, the people you meet on the street that they can find us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or whatever purveyor of podcast goodness they prefer. Thank you, folks, for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Sustainability in Your Ear, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.